Hello, everyone. It's Francis, Martin, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. It's our Friday Q&A session where we, in office hours, where we answer your questions. Got a whole bunch today. Normally, the way it works is Francis reads the question, Martin gives the correct answer, and then I spend a lot of time giving you nonsense details that you probably don't want to have. But anyway, this is this is a pretty successful series that we have. I don't know how many questions did we answer now? It's
roughly 250.
So, and the questions are fantastic. So thank you for the questions you do provide. So do you want to kick it off right now? Anything else?
In fact, we will cross the 250 mark today if we keep to our usual pace, and probably land on one of my questions. So yes, I do ask questions in this too, and I wait in queue because this one I probably waited for 2 months already. All right, so question 1 from Francis. What do you think will happen to the federal and state income taxes in the next few decades after turbulent 2030s? Will they become higher or lower, and why? What about the rest of the developed world? For example, Western Europe, Australia, and Japan.
You think you could have asked, that's this question 1? Right out the gate, you're going to ask that question?
Well, we could have answered it like last time, but then I decided to reserve this question for the usual spot, which is the first question in the queue for the day.
Well, I got to think about this one. Oh, so you're saying not just...
Let's start with the United States first.
All right. They have to go up.
Because that's the real reason. The reasons or the factors are the things I'm looking for.
The factor is we're not having kids. So when you decrease and you get older. So when you decrease the rate of the number of people, and you have the same benefits, you no longer have a growth economy. Without a growth economy, there's a demand for, right? I mean, it's a time frame issue. So there's a demand for your taxes to pay off what's been indebted so far. There's a demand for so many services that we've put into place. So I would expect that the taxes would go up, if nothing in the structure of the economy were to change, and I think that's too loose a statement. If the present consumption-based economy remains the same, it will have to go up.
Well, so then the follow-up from that is when you say the consumption-based economy will have to change in order for taxes otherwise taxes will go up. The policies that Trump have put in place, tariffs in effect subsidizes the producer at the expenses of the consumer as well as foreign producers, because you're essentially putting a tax on foreign imports and therefore foreign producers and the consumer of those imports. Would that constitute a significant enough change in the structure?
Well, tariffs suppress consumption, right, which penalizes producers, but
hold on, only penalizes external producers. It shouldn't penalize internal.
Correct. I'm sorry. I just want to answer that.
developing local production after it's all left. That's not gonna happen immediately.
No, but unless it will,
No, happen.
it
still
will
will
happen. It will happen. It will not happen immediately. You can't create a factory like tomorrow, but with enough incentives and provided you give it the time within the next decade. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, but
So,
depends on the next administration.
Yeah.
he's asking a question about what happens over the next few decades. And so before I get lost here, the oh shit, I had it. Tariffs, but the tariff is essentially paid by the importer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, and then it is hopefully assumedly collected from the what do you call it? From the consumers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, or the intervening parties. So what we're really saying is that we would change from income taxes to consumption taxes.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Right. And so what does that really do? It doesn't alter, it just alters who's paying what. I don't, in my world, I understand that the tariffs are a really good way of dealing with certain arbitrage problems, like labor arbitrage or technology, or
Yep.
right? They're important for protecting strategic industry, right? I mean, you want those things, and so I just see them as an incentive more than anything that really affects taxes. In Trump's case, what he's saying is that our market is so valuable to others that we can use it as a revenue producer for the government. In other words, we have the surplus to pay for this. It will generate some beneficial income for us because we're so capable of consuming versus others, which is due largely to our
But
financial.
yeah, I was gonna say that consumption from 80 years ago, that consumption was based on U.S. having 50% of the world's production because the rest of the old world was basically in ruins.
Correct.
And we had the largest consumption base because we're also the largest producer at the time. But we've hollowed out that
Yes.
production base, and now it's just financialization, essentially using U.S. dollar for
Correct.
consumption.
Yes.
And
Which we knew, which was started in the 70s and 80s, and we knew what we were doing, right?
so that can't last. It still has the U.S. still has a population. It still has the for lack of a better word, the facade of being able to consume all these goods based on the fact that U.S. dollar is the reserve currency.
It's partly based on reserve currency. Yes, it's also partly based on the fact that it's regardless of all the crap we hear right now in the international media, it's actually a relatively safe haven for property rights.
Oh, true. Yes.
Right. And so we don't have any other. There's no other safe havens because the U.S. government will not steal your money. That's the difference, right? I mean, everybody else will and has. Even Euro did. That's what killed the euro.
The U.S. government will not explicitly steal your money.
Steal your money. Okay. Yes. All right. So that's correct. So okay. So that's the going. So step one is yes. All other things ignored. In other words, as a going concern, assuming no major changes, taxes would have to go up. As a the problem we have with that is that we're going to go through over the next. I mean, we're going through it now, but throughout this and certainly next decade, we're going to go through some pretty catastrophic change in the world. And this, of course, you combine the demographic decline with the fact that what can people consume now? In other words, that they don't already have. So, in other words, what's the consumption economy producing for them? Okay, the next thing would be, what can they consume other than things that are really expensive? Like, it's one thing to consume an extra loaf of bread. It's another to consume an extra month of health care.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the productivity is the issue, or is an issue that would come up. I didn't plan this argument out, so I'm doing it all in my head in advance. So I apologize. That's gonna be. I didn't think this through before we had the question came up, so I have to do this in my head. So I'm sorry about the speed I'm doing.
No. I think that's what I value is just trace through the process itself.
Okay. So then you come to productivity. Well, it could turn out that productivity and AI is the buzz right now, but I mean that isn't the only thing that's possible, right? We could invest in nuclear power plants. We could invest in AI. We could restore education, right? We could do a lot of things that would help our productivity. We have to. I'm going to say the unpleasant thing is that we have to end this immigration of IQ below the median, because
it becomes a drag on the society.
Right, and we finally overturned the false promise again of the EU and the Thinkatariat that the immigration was a possible replacement. It's not, because aside from Westerners and a small percentage of East Asians, the immigrants actually are so substantially less productive than Europeans that they're actually a net burden, not a net gain. So they made and I knew this was bullshit the whole time, and it used to annoy me every time an economist would say this. Like, there's no evidence of that at all.
Well, it's a fallacy of the blank slate, i.e., it's basically a continuation of that, right?
Yes.
Notice how I didn't even comment about your Coke until now.
I've been waiting for it. I've been waiting for it to happen. I don't have any coffee yet. My coffee's empty, so I'll make some, and then when Martin goes off on a rant, I'll make some coffee. So there's the productivity question, right? We have the chance to move the lever of productivity. We have, but my look at the world is that the re-emergence of conflict post the Pax Americana is going to absorb large numbers of dollars. Large amounts of money and surpluses, at the same time that population aging decline is going to absorb a lot of money. At the same time, that because we're not having kids, we have to find new sources of productivity by investment. So I see these three competing, three things competing for our surpluses, and I'm concerned we're not able to produce such surpluses to pay for them. As such, I can only see taxes going up. So
on that first one thought I've been having has been, okay, people are getting older, and in societies where endowments are essentially written into law, there's United States with the Social Security Act and everything, and even more so in Europe and so on. At some point, it's going to have to come to a breaking point. At some
Correct.
point, the working population will refuse to get taxed to the bone to pay for the retirement of the older baby boomers and so on.
Seen it in the younger generation. I mean, look at this. You started out with the boomer criticism, and now it's gone to, you guys ruined this, and it's all your fault. And why the hell should we pay you for having ruined it? That's already happening. So I agree with him, of course, absolutely. They're not entirely wrong, right? I mean, some of it's just like, well, the world works. You can't blame people for being prescient. It's like blaming, I would say, okay, you want to blame the boomers for that, I'm going to blame you for not having kids, right? The boomers followed their incentives and their beliefs. You're following your incentives and your beliefs. Which one's causing more damage? The boomers who overspent, or you who are not having kids? It's you who are not having kids is causing the damage. So who's really at fault here? The only way you're digging yourself out of this hole is that. So you can't. It's really hard to blame previous generations for following the rational incentives available to them.
By the way, I'm not done yet. I'm not like trying to assign blame for generation. What I meant is at some point, so essentially we're talking about, even within the same policy, an intergenerational conflict on their incentives and so on.
Correct.
I don't see how this could go on without so in a democratic society, it represents democracy, the boomers can, while they're still alive anyway, they can vote to get their way. But at what point it becomes a breaking point where the younger generation says, just to hell with this, we're not going to allow you to oppress us and steal time from us via the government and the law, legislation.
Yep, absolutely.
So for something like, say, Social Security Act, which was enacted more than a human lifetime ago, do you see the younger generations voting to essentially upend it?
No, we can't. Nobody in the world can afford to do that. It's actually the problem is we're not using the Singapore method, so the money is being consumed rather than invested. So if we convert to the Singapore method, I think that would be a cost that we could inflate away over time. And so that's one of my suggestions, is just convert to the Singapore method where people have accounts and responsibilities and their actual investments, so that the money's actually working in the economy somewhere. So I think that'll happen. Give me a second. Yes, and so that's my belief in that outcome. Like you look like you have more on your mind, and I'm waiting for the bubble to come out.
So that's, well, the Singapore method, even if we were to implement it today, that takes years to come to fruition.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because you got to let your investments grow.
Yeah, but we can float it, right, if we start it now, right? But I mean, if we wait for another 40 years to do it, that's the problem. Right? I mean, we just sent trillions of dollars to people during the COVID thing where the money was unnecessary, ill spent, and even the whole action was unnecessary. So look what we did there. If we were to say one of the ways we correct the debt is by adding to it some chunk to it now, so that we could actually achieve what we're talking about, that would be a rational choice. At least we're digging ourselves out of the hole, and at least we're digging ourselves out of the hole. Yes.
So because of this intergenerational conflict and the fact that we're basically talking about wealth transfer from the younger working classes to the older retired but boomer class. So for now it's the boomers, and I guess in another 20, 30 years it will be the Gen Xers, even though Gen Xers is a smaller generation. I guess I'm trying to gauge at what are the signs that the younger generation would have had enough that they would rebel and upset the existing order.
What can they really do that isn't suicidal?
What do you mean by suicidal?
In other words, they're going to hurt. If they take away the benefit, they've hurt themselves, right? What they really need to do is have kids so that there's more producers, so that they can have those benefits themselves. But if they're rebelling against this stuff so they can have consumption, it doesn't mean they're converted to savings. It's going to, in other words, the savings themselves, they're not going to do that because there's no free capital to do it. So it's not like they're going to go and create their own retirement accounts. What they're going to do instead is eliminate them, the possibility of them. So there's no logic in rebelling against what really is a reproductive problem. The problem is just reproduction. Rebel against what the previous generations did, but in the belief of endless growth. That's what they did. Everybody believed in endless growth. I mean, not everybody, but I mean, everybody thought that the Jubilee would continue. And it didn't, because the rest of the world caught up. Now, if you say that, this is the problem of democratic polities. A monarchy might have said, no, we're just going to save the money, which is what the Saudis are doing and the Omanis are doing, right? We're going to put this money away so that we in the future, when we don't have this money, we don't have this income, we have this investment income. Well, I mean, democracies don't do that. They spend the fucking money. And so, but the problem is the only problem is, if you don't have kids, you can't play these games. And they're not having kids. Why are they having kids? Education, and education is the primary blame, and outsourcing of the working class economy is the other thing to blame, and the fact that we don't produce enough housing stock, or conversely, that we allow interest rates to go for 30 years, which allows the price of housing to escalate and function as a savings vehicle for people in houses, rather than as a place for people to invest in having children for people who don't yet have houses. That was probably something worth worth clipping there.
But you're missing marriage incentives.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're right. I missed that one. And of course, you add the incentives for women to satisfy their demand for attention and hyperconsumption instead of producing women. It's like, okay, well, if we're gonna, then do you have an asymmetry between the lifespan and adaptability of the sexes, while men are paying a higher cost and women are paying little to no cost. And so this Martin's correct, is that we've created disincentives for not only for relationships, but for people to do relationship formation, household formation, and family formation. I mean, if I talk to people today, I do it all the time because you know how gregarious I am. I view the world as a vast open survey for me to take advantage of it every moment. And I just ask people, and they say, well, I'm not gonna. We're only gonna have one or two because it's too expensive. Right? And the answer is, it's too fucking expensive. Why is it too expensive? Why does a house? Well, we live where houses are absurd, right? I mean, but even in where I grew up, the house I grew up in is in rural Western New York State, right,
Mm-hmm.
is still under $200,000, right?
Right now?
Yeah,
Okay,
right,
well, I should move
right,
there.
right. No, well, but you have to deal with Western New York winters, right? All right. Um, so so you look at that, all right. But if you want a house, the same house in Bellevue, right, it's going to cost you a million too,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's how are people going to get in that? Well, that's why all everybody wants to move to a city for opportunity, but all increases in salaries are eventually consumed by rent and mortgage prices.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you fix that? You fix that by making it so that you don't do what the Nordics have done, which is like you can basically get a home mom. This is an exaggeration. A home mortgage for 100 years, right? I mean, that's not really true, but it's close to it's almost like that. And so what happens is you inflate the price of housing, so turn them into saving vehicles. Well, that only works if you turn it around and flip it around and say, we're going to build Khrushchevkas, right, in Russian volume for people to live in cities so that they can have household formation, right? But people don't want household formation in cities anymore. They want some do, but that's a very minority. People want their little pink houses with the
See,
post-war.
this explains the phenomena that I've been seeing in Japan. So you know how you get ads from once in a while, like some Japanese house going for ridiculously cheap, like some 100-year-old made of wood,
Yeah,
nicely decorated house in the countryside in Japan going for like $50,000.
yeah, yeah.
Because the older generations have died, they have a decreasing population, and nobody wants to go live there. And yet, at the same time, you have apartments in places like Tokyo still going to $1 million plus.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
I've seen that
and they're
described.
small. And they're small.
Oh yeah, they're basically flats.
We've seen that described as a black hole effect of cities. It sucks up all opportunities, so everyone has to move there,
So
and conditions of living gets extremely worse, but nothing can change it without some sort of central planning forcing a broader distribution.
when you cast a timeline to a lot longer, right? Since nobody is having kids these days, even the developing world, this problem fixes itself in 50 to 100 years at the current rate that we're going.
No, I mean, and okay, can I add? This is just
You're
a
just
humor.
gonna have a whole bunch of abandoned houses because no, like like my generation would have died by then. If my generation didn't have any kids and had a house like that, like who's gonna take it over? And even the government may not even take it over and sell it because nobody's maintaining it.
So, I mean, the one good thing, okay, is that conservatives are still having children and progressives are not. So, I mean, you could still see it as an interesting filtering mechanism. I haven't thought about it enough to think through whether that tends to be deterministic for any life form. But I would assume that it probably is, because you're the minute you're favoring hyperconsumption at the temporal consumption at the cost of intertemporal capitalization, you're essentially burning everything down, and which is what we've been doing. And so, this I blame. Here's my reductive criticism of this whole process. Well, because of the race differences in IQ, we are not, as employers, allowed to give IQ tests. Because we're not IQ tests, people have to obtain their certification by other means. That means they spend $100 and whatever $1,000 on, or 80 to 100 and something on education, depending on what you're getting, and they delay household formation, delay family formation, and impoverish themselves in old age, causing decline because we don't allow the companies to use IQ tests. That's my reductive example of causal chains Small things in large numbers have profound consequences, especially over time. Because realistically, it's just IQ. I mean, it's not just IQ. It's IQ and conscientiousness, right? Because if we get someone like you who's conscientious, you know, you're going to do well no matter what.
Now, is that just the U.S. because of some progressive era law, or like do we have examples of other countries where do we have
go ahead.
do we have examples of other countries where this law is not in place and where they do give IQ tests as part of the
Well, Jesus Christ, China does it all fucking day long. All right. They don't do it just by IQ tests. They do it by rigorous testing.
Oh, sure.
And China's been doing it for 3,500 years or something.
Yeah, but everyone cheats.
What?
Yeah, but everyone cheats on those tests.
These days, everybody cheats. In fact, I was just watching a video about, this is 300 BC, before the first emperor was able to unite China. It talks about how a legalist scholar changed the law in the Qing state at the time, one of the 7 warring states, and that eventually boosted the Qing economy such that it was able to essentially turn it into a war machine, right? And it was able to conquer the rest of the warring states. And what struck me was how mobile, like the laws that he put in, legislation he put in, essentially something like as straightforward as this: if you go out there in the battlefield and you kill the enemies, then based on the number of heads you collect, we'll give you however much land.
Yes.
And that was even before the imperial exam were put in place. Talk about meritocracy. Anyways, I think we've done this one justice.
That was a great discussion. I just want to say that that the direction is almost certainly up. All right. If there is no equivalent of the computer science revolution productivity, if that productivity is such that it displaces the labor, right? Labor. In other words, that is the end of consumer capitalism as we practice it today. It doesn't mean the end of capitalism, because that's never going to end. What it does mean is that we will have to follow something like our recommendation, that we move people largely from private sector production for the purpose of consumption instead to something like the WPA during the Depression, where large parts of the population are actually paid to work on commons, in the commons, instead of private consumption. In other words, and if you've been to anything that was built by the WPA, which of course at the time was ridiculed because people did so little work, but they weren't paid much money either. But we had so many people building these things, we were able to make a lot of this country beautiful during that time. So we built beautiful architecture, beautiful parks and whatever. There is a pent-up demand for that to be done to infrastructure and to commons. In other words, we have spent a long time with hyperconsumption. Our infrastructure is not in good condition, whatever. So there is ample reason for that productivity to be shifted to a very different kind of economy. Not one that is absent what we call capitalism, but one that is driven more by running local and state and even some degree federal agencies as businesses trying to produce capital, durable capital, rather than immediate consumption. In other words, we will be able to, there are means of organizing people in a world where automation has done to the middle classes what it has done to the working classes.
There's a bit of correspondence to what Karl Marx predicted would happen.
Well, which part?
There is correspondence to the fact that, yes, he would say it, he would make it as a social phenomenon, and we would say it, the incentives just don't exist. But yes, there's a correlation here.
Like Marx didn't suggest Leninism. He was saying that capitalism would lead to communism.
Well, I don't see this as communism. I just see it as
communism. Okay.
What?
Communism. Okay.
Communism. I'm good with communism. All right. Because communism is, yeah. Communists didn't do a bad job with everything. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's the ideology I have a problem with. Not
there's time and place for central planning.
Yes.
Like when you need to move the whole system towards a Nash equilibrium.
It was miraculous what they did. I would have preferred they didn't kill so many people and use the gulags and do that other stupid shit they did. But I mean, the central planning, the central organization, has its place. When you ever have to move, it's the big difference between catching up and getting ahead. If you want to get ahead, you need the market to compute. If you want to catch up, you need the government to force or reorganization. I think these are fantastic. These are not. That's the problem. I think the problem we have in the century and a half. Martin, you could comment on this if you wouldn't mind. Is that we try to do everything one way, all right? Instead of saying, well, following the Romans, you need dictatorship for this, and you need a republic for this, and you need jubilees for this, and those depend on our current state. The whole trick is for the government to be adaptive enough to be able to do it. And
use these as tools rather than getting to religious debate between communism and whatever.
Well, historical philosophers compared nation to a body, and that is basically correct. The body does a lot of stuff on its own, but that doesn't mean we can conclude the brain never needs to assign some higher goals.
Okay. Let's go to question 2. All right, question 2 from Evan. Please deliberate. Recently, Mungo met a Mungo lady, along with 106 other ancient ancestral remains discovered in Australia's Willandra Lake region, received approval to be reburied after a long dispute in court. A large number of these remains may have held DNA and thus significant scientific value, which has been destroyed with reburial. Does this constitute a significant crime under natural law, or do existing Aboriginal groups have a right to decide what is done with the remains?
Well, natural law is descriptive, not prescriptive. There's always a human decider, and when applied, the results depend on who's in-group and out-group. And even then, the result will depend on which interest we prioritize. It may be some compromise that doesn't fully satisfy either side. Personally, I don't think Australia should be worried about concerns of native population beyond ensuring they persist, like other endangered species, because there is no need to, but modern West is based around doing the exact opposite, undermining interests of white populations wherever possible, including by giving in to every frivolous demand of minorities. And that's clearly what happened here.
Martin's usual bite. I would say that discovering burials and removing DNA from them, which is usually a bone over here or in a tooth, so that we can gain knowledge of history, is not any kind of sacrilege. However, I can understand. There's a dog on coastal. Um, um, I do understand the disregard for the dead in different societies, and but I'm more concerned. But excuse me. Sorry, I'm still getting over this.
No need to apologize.
That these communities have alternative. They have they don't. They have more alternative. I would call sacred or personal ambitions, political ambitions, by playing this particular game. So I see it as I see it as a kind of hey, look at me, I'm oppressed, selfishness. When what we normally do with ancient burials is treat them with respect, which you'll find out if you go to any place that does a significant amount of archaeology. And certainly, so so I don't think this is an either or proposition. I think it's great. We found some people. That's fantastic. If you want to make some holy ground to rebury them, great. But there's no reason we can't extract DNA from them. That's absolutely absurd. That would be my judgment on it. And as given Martin is correct here that it's not prescriptive, this is a matter of in-group sacrally, what's the word? Sacredness?
Yeah. Like, I understand from their perspective why they might not be happy about it, but I'm saying we shouldn't care.
Yes. Because the knowledge could be valued. You never know. We find all sorts of stuff out from DNA, so it's not it's not hurtful. Like the Chinese, what's the stuff in Eastern China that the Chinese government doesn't like is because they have more European contribution to them, and the Chinese
Wait,
government
the what?
there's a bunch of archaeology in Western China, and the people are essentially high admixtures with West Eurasians.
Are you talking about the Xinjiang region or like more like Sichuan region?
You're asking me because you're asking me like I would know the difference in my.
But so like roughly like which thing that we're talking about? What archaeological thing?
I'd have to look at a map. You know, that basin?
The basin. You're probably talking about Sichuan Basin. So Sichuan Basin, they discovered some really, really old civilization sites and whatever. But I haven't heard about the controversy. I wouldn't be surprised though if there are parts in China where the admixture has more like Western admixture. Because even in Chinese mythology, they have this mythology of like the ancient leader of the Chinese fighting with ancient tribal leader of some foreign tribe and defeated them. But this foreign tribe, it's someone who's, they call it the god of soldiers or something. So, all dressed in bronze armor and whatnot, and very tall.
Look it up real quick because
there's some population in Japan that looks.
Yeah, it's the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang.
The Tarim
they're Indo-Europeans, and they're from Savio, and I know Andronovo. I don't know the one.
Oh, they're in Xinjiang. Yeah, so yeah, if we're talking about this place, then yeah, of course, because I've been out there before, and even though it's part of China, you go out there and it's not, the people there are not too different from mid-Asia.
Right, Central Asia, exactly. That's what I say. So yeah, because that's way out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's nearly into the stands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's in fact, there's a strip of land. You can probably see even on a map that connects this place with Afghanistan, and this very province, whatever they want, it's actually a self-governing region supposedly by the Uyghurs. This place contains this province has a place that is it's a place on Earth that's furthest away from any ocean, and there's a monument there. Like 6,000 kilometers either way, whether you go to the Arctic or the Indian Ocean or the Pacific.
That's crazy.
Yes. Yes, it did used to be part of the stance.
Is Xinjiang, or how do you say it?
Xinjiang literally means new border or new, new borderlands.
Okay. All right. So, because the Uyghurs are there. Okay, I get it. Now I understand the whole.
Yeah, it's the Uyghurs.
All right.
I've even recently read claims that Mongolians of Genghis Khan weren't the same as Mongolians of today. They were, well, lighter.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. Because the Mongols did go out west and raped a bunch of women.
Yeah, I mean those that arrived, not those that they produced.
Mm.
I don't know.
All right, so did we do that one justice?
I feel like we didn't create a rule, but the rule is probably that there is no harm done. In other words, it's not an either-or proposition. There's no reason that the genetic material couldn't be preserved and the body is reburied with some sacred form. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get in a position of saying the sacred is immaterial. It isn't to in-groups, right? When you get across groups, you're down to basically natural law. And so natural law would say that there's no material harm done because both can benefit from it. So that would be my argument. I mean, it's different if we had to grind the whole fucking body up in order to distill it, but we don't. You basically drill this little freaking hole in these two, either a tooth which is small or this goofy little extraordinarily hard bone we have in our heads, and you pull out a small amount of material, and then you basically multiply it. And so I don't see the complaint here. If you want to pick me up in 1,000 years to figure out what fucking genetics I had, please go to it. I can sort of, for the primal part of me, can imagine wanting my being to be intact, right? I mean, I can understand that, like in your grave forever. I can spiritually understand this. But as long as you're reburied, and we've been reburying fucking people for all of human history. I mean, in Western Europe, we bury people all the time. I mean, as a matter of fact, the worst part about Western Europe is we would reuse the graves, right? So you bury somebody until they've been dead long enough. You dig, then you put a new body in there, because the whole thing.
What do you do with the old one?
If it's just bones, you just leave it there, right? You just leave it in the dirt. You throw some more dirt in it. There are cases, and this is in one of the Shakespeare's plays. What he says, when he looks at the skull and he says, "Wherefore art thou?" So, um, so in those days, I don't know what they did with the bones. I suppose they just used them, threw them back in. But in general, the reason you bury somebody 6 feet under is to keep the smell and the smell out and the animals away from it, because it needs to be at least 3 to 6 feet to prevent the smell of decomposition from attracting animals.
Mm-hmm.
So church graveyards are notorious for being dug up and reburied all the time. You have no idea how many people are underneath there.
My argument is really, what are Aboriginals gonna do? Declare war? Good luck with that.
Well, we're supposed to be talking about, well, I don't want to get into this one, but we're supposed to be talking about dispute resolution by peaceful means.
So just following up some audience questions, or actually audience's comments. Alfred Duringson said, "Curt, have you tried some Halls of Ricola? Cough drops might help."
Yeah, I mean, I munch on those like they're candy. Yeah.
Okay, shall we move on?
Yep.
All right. Next question is also mine, but I think we've answered this one already, but I'll read it out anyway. So, Curt, what were the perverse incentives that led to the current housing bubble in the U.S.? What do you see as all the possible routes of real estate deflation can take, and who are all the winners and losers of each route? Well, I mean, we touched on this in that first question.
I think you could put this into a search engine and get 500 economists to say exact same thing. I gave you the reason for the housing problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's the flight to the cities got out of hand, and it got out of hand partly because of our education folly, which has caused a hell of a misallocation. So, and then it's caused distortion of the housing and the housing production. And we got a lot of people who we have a lot of little condos that people really don't want to live in, and if
Mm-hmm.
they live, they can't have kids, and we don't have enough household formation that enables you to have kids, and is at least enough of a yard where they can get exercise and be safe, and where where it's safe enough for your kids to play outside and be safe without your 100% constant supervision, which is necessary in urban areas.
And misallocation and imbalance, so on, can only go on for so long before it reverses.
Right. I like this conversation we're having today because it points out the real problem is reproduction. You have to have replacement reproduction to maintain the institutions we've built for our own lifetime financial security.
But in my opinion, the black hole effect of cities also needs to be addressed directly. The opportunity needs to be more widely distributed instead of being sucked up into one place.
Yeah, and I think that's happening technologically a little bit. I mean, we certainly have. I mean, you do not want to be one of those people who, during the first part of this century, built a lot of office buildings, and so you're heavily in commercial real estate.
Mm-hmm.
As I remember everybody saying, well, I've created this real estate investment trust, and I'm like, you're fucking nuts. If this reproductive shit continues, there's not going to be any office space. There's not going to be anybody wanting these condos. So we got this problem in Seattle in particular, where Amazon basically bulldozed, what is it, the North
Westlake Union area?
Yeah, the Westlake Union area, built all these fucking...
Yeah, I still remember when those places were basically flat. Like lasers cameras there was just one-story building, right? And you can actually... It's like... I wouldn't call it rundown exactly, but it's just like flat plots of land. And within 10 years, it's all high-rises.
Right, it's all high-rises. There's nobody in them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They can't lease the fucking office space. They can't give the shit away.
Well, at
So
least Amazon kind of strong arm all the employees, so you have to come back to the office 5 days a
yeah,
week.
Well, even outside of digital economy, I've read a good article that proposes alternative models for cities that avoid the black hole problem. One example was like building a city around a crater, basically, or like having a park in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
so that nothing can concentrate in there.
mhm.
I'll put it into the chat.
I get it, but I remember living in Boston in the '80s, right? I couldn't. I tried New York, and I got offered an amazing job in New York, and I just like I'll have a nervous breakdown. I'll be fucking psycho like the rest of these people. But I got a job in Boston, and I lived in Back Bay there, and it was just it was let me see, how does it, the the joy of being young and having access to all that stimulation is quite nice. I'm not sure it's nicer than getting on the train or the T or whatever you want to call it, the subway, from a suburb and taking it into enjoying it and then going back to the suburbs at night. Matter of fact, I'm quite sure I'd rather do the latter. Although I got to say that I'm in the best shape I'm in my life is whenever I live in a city and have to walk a couple of miles a day,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have to do anything, and I stay in great shape. And yeah, it is fun, but I mean, the crime used to drive me nuts. I lived in Boston, in Back Bay, back when they were, when we were doing carjacking, which was they just walk up to the car and shoot you through the window. Right?
Shit.
You don't know about this, Francis?
Well, I mean, I believe you, but
Yeah, it was all because there's like this railroad tracks that separate it's called Roxbury,
mm-hmm.
which is the bad place, from the main area, and if you went over those train tracks, you could get just walk up, bang, steal your car, and drag your body out and steal your car. That's one of the things that caused this rapid crackdown
Mm-hmm.
on activity by our police departments.
Well,
So,
the tangential point. If the vehicle is not moving, it's just a death trap.
yeah, I have this problem because one of the things that I got taught overseas was that you don't put your seatbelt on until you're actually in motion.
Yeah, about 10 miles an hour.
Yeah, you don't until you're actually in motion, the seatbelt could get you killed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I have a problem here because since I've been back is I don't want to lose the habit and I haven't, but I feel guilty the minute I pull out of my fucking driveway, right, or in something, but I'm not going to be in a position where I'm vulnerable.
All right, shall we move on?
Yep.
All right, question 4 from Gaspacho. What happens when we die? Where does consciousness go? You couldn't have asked a more philosophical question.
This is an example where language itself causes confusion by how it frames the concept. Consciousness isn't a thing in space, it's a process in time. It's what our brains do when we die, or for that matter, when we go to sleep, get knocked unconscious, or fall into a coma. They stop doing it. You obviously perceive a continuity of permanence, but that's your memory, not consciousness itself. Memories consisting of neural connections are technically still there after that, unless that was caused by brain damage that destroyed them, but ability to recall them is gone along with everything else. Now I try to give credit where credit is due, where various religions and philosophies are concerned, but on this issue I've got nothing. If anything, I'd say I consider concern about remaining conscious forever a misguided one. In fact, a terrifying one for me if I had any reason to consider it true. My concern is about my people persisting indefinitely.
Well done, brother. That is beautiful. Well said. And Martin, in a couple sentences, collapses 50% of the nonsense that's stated in philosophy and religion. I like this answer, Martin, a lot. I think that the way I look at it is that your consciousness, to the degree that you can externalize it as anything other than the resonance between neural cells and your memory, is best produced by your interactions with others and the memories that you leave behind in others, and the memory of your existence you leave behind on this earth. So if you want to say, does your consciousness persist? It persists in that way, but it is not, in other words, the result of your consciousness persists, but your consciousness does not. And I say that partly, Martin, to answer to give credit where credit is due, just like you did, which is that I'm not sure it's a good idea to not think that way. In other words, it's a good to think that you're a severed spirit existing in some eternal realm. That's actually useful if you're in the sense of maintaining intertemporal judgment of your actions. In other words, there's value in acting as if you would do that. The second thing is, if you're talking about living on through others, there's value in acting as if that were the case, but that actually is the case. And so I'm not sure that it's something that it isn't. I'm not sure it's a mythology or a metaphysics, in other words, a myth. I'm not that is necessarily bad for us unless you take it as Martin is suggesting you don't, which is that that you have persistence when you no longer have existence.
I see it as a symptom.
Do you have persistence when you do you have persistence when you no longer have existence?
But define persistence. Persistence in what? The meta persistence? I mean, this video that we captured here, assuming that 100 years from now, people still, that we didn't go back to Stone Ages, people still have technology to view this video. I mean, in a sense, you, me, and Martin will persist for the next 100 years when our bones have gone to dust.
People thought that internet would be forever, and most of it is already dead. It's not going to be there.
It's just a verb and noun. The verb is persistence, and existence is noun. It's the same. It's a that's all I was trying to get across.
Well, I see it as a symptom of excessive individualism, same as today.
I see. Very
people are
yeah.
figuring out how to live forever, and their reason isn't that they still have more to contribute to their family and to their people. They want to do it for themselves and just accumulate more and more resources. It's selfishness.
So you're saying it's a primitivism we should seek to expel. Yeah, I like that. That's smart, Martin.
I do think that given longer lifespans, certain individuals can contribute a lot more to society.
That's
but if we're
that's the point. It matters what their reasons for wanting to live longer is.
But if we are to say universalize this technology so that all humans can live forever, then I think that actually that spells doom for humanity as a whole.
Yeah, like there's a whole lot of people that should live shorter than they do.
Yes, you and I agree on that front.
Yeah. So I just want to touch base. Martin was correct. Is that Mongolians of Genghis Khan Zero were genetically more mixed West Eurasian and East Eurasian, while modern Mongolians are genetically more East Eurasian during later migrations, bottlenecks, and political changes that re-Mongolized the population. You would likely find a higher percentage of Caucasite features among Genghis Khan's generals, princes, and khans, including lighter hard ear shades, higher nose bridges, and more varied eye colors. By contrast, the ordinary Mongol soldier was closer to the Mongolian or Buryat populations and features. That's my understanding. Okay.
So the drawings of Genghis Khan are in fact wrong then.
I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer.
So he was Indo-European, I guess.
No, I thought he had red hair. Did he have red hair, or is that just a mythology?
Ulfric is saying that. I have no idea.
Okay.
The problem with the red hair thing is, yeah, he had reddish brown hair. That's why I understand why people have territorial disputes and stuff like that. But I mean, I consider that. Is it my opinion? My opinion is that's really quite silly. All right, what's next?
Question 5 from Gabriel. Is this the Gabriel? Our Gabriel? I'm unsure about how best to approach the rational dimension of testifiability. Okay, that sounds like our Gabriel. The others are pretty straightforward, but I find myself questioning whether to apply it as actor relative. Quote, does a subject's proposition align with the scope of their knowledge and incentives, end quote, or object relative, quote, parentheses, does the proposition advocates a transfer that doesn't violate bounded rationality. Example proposition, society would function best absent private property. Under object relative analysis, it fails rationally because it assumes people will surrender their demonstrated interest and that acquisition doesn't drive human action. Under subject relative analysis, it may or may not fail. It depends on the scope of cognitive capacity, knowledge, and incentives of the subject making the proposition. Pass would result from a determination that the subject's proposition is rational given their limitations regardless of other criteria, and fail would indicate deceit.
I'm probably not giving a complete answer, but testifiability of rationality is relevant not only in proposition but also in claims, and is exactly what we do in court when we seek whether the accused had a motive. We are asking whether it was rational for him to perform the crime, which, if shown, serves as support for him having indeed performed it. In the case of propositions, I'm not sure what rationality would cover that reciprocity doesn't already.
Yeah, I might need some help understanding this question, because what I see is the way I did it is what's called bounded rationality, which he mentions there, which is the question when we bring up rational is what Martin said. Can we explain that the incentives, there is the relationship between the incentives and the resulting actions? If we would empathize and sympathize, whether it's empathize emotionally, sympathize mentally, with the actor, as we can agree with, in other words, resonate with those incentives producing that action, we would claim it was a correlation and true. This is because humans are marginally indifferent when it comes to incentives to act. We are only marginally different on incentives to act, given the giving them, this is complicated, marginal difference in our inventories. So if I am in a scarce position on something, I will act more desperately than if I am in a overabundance position of something. So that's a bit of math there, but that's exactly what people do. So I'm not sure I understand the object relative analysis. These people sort of demonstrate interesting. No, I mean, I don't understand. I guess I don't understand that statement. Bounded rationality is subjective analysis that says we can understand, we can validate that the incentives that the person was exposed to would logically produce the outcome, the actions the person demonstrated under the limits of bounded rationality, which means the information available and the time in which one needed to act. So I think I'm not sure I understand the question. Why does actor relative subject proposition line with the scope? I think you're saying, oh, proposition. He's talking about a truth claim.
No, he started asking the question about rational dimension of testifiability.
Right. That just means that under bounded rationality would the incentives lead to the action. That's in other words, there are times when you look at things, the incentives are there, but no human would do that. You know, I wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it. You know, most people wouldn't do it in that circumstance. So it's an actor relative, not objective relative. I don't like his framing as the problem. I can't understand. I'm not sure I understand his framing of the question, but from the standpoint of how we use it, or I put it together, it's just a test of subjective decision making. I mean, you don't go and if somebody ends up doing some suicidal thing in the moment, you'd have to explain the incentives that produce it. Most of us, Martin covered this because he said motive. I mean, that's all that motive is, just the term for the incentives that existed at the moment in time. What's the matter, Francis? I feel like I've answered this question, and I feel like you're thinking I didn't.
That kind of subjective evaluation fails when sex and race differences come into play. Or huge class
It's not
differences.
that we can't understand them, Martin, right? So this is the thing of rational means explicable, right?
Yeah, so that doesn't always mean we can empathize. It's explicable in the same way that it's explicable by animals.
We may not be able to empathize, but we can sympathize. In other words, we can understand that it is possible to hold that position. No,
I have to read this question several times, but I think what Gabriel is asking is, by rational, is it objectively rational or subjectively rational?
Subjectively rational.
So if it's subjectively rational, then that requires us to put ourselves in a subject's frame.
Correct. And since we're marginally indifferent, we almost always can.
So is this where in the common law system, the juries are required to judge based on, let me see if I get this right. They have to make judgment based on what they would do in your situation if they had your knowledge versus what they would do themselves.
That's why we have juries. right, is specifically to test this hypothesis. Juries are an empirical measure, a survey of the subjectivity of the actor, right, in given human marginal indifferences. If you have a large enough distribution, in other words, not one judge, but 12 jurors, you will probably come up with a distribution that the people can agree upon that says that this was his subject, this was his motives, this is what he did.
Right. So then that I mean that's basically that testifiability applied to common law.
Correct.
Yeah.
But there comes into play what I said earlier. It's supposed to be jury of my peers, which should be members of my race, sex, class.
In matters where of internal, yes. In matters of cross, no. That's what common means. It means that we have discovered a means of decidability common across different populations. So when Rome did, that's why Rome came up with this empirical test, is that Romans were empirical. And they said, well, this tribe does it, and this tribe does it, and this tribe does it. Therefore, that's the way it is to be decided everywhere. And they did it so that would suppress, they would suppress intertribal conflict when it wasn't between tribes. The conflict was between tribes.
But that still works between similar population. I don't see how you can do that between like Anglo-Saxons and some African tribe that was brought over.
In other words,
let's construct an example here, right? And because they
He's gotta
sound
go.
a little morbid, but just because my knowledge of the law usually centers around self-defense, so let's use that example. Martin, I'm going to pick on you. Let's say that you shot some.
Not pick on Martin too.
Let's say you shot some African tribesman in the head and claimed self-defense. In the jury, should we have all 12 jury members of your kinsmen, or should we have half and half?
Well, if you put any blacks there, they're going to side with the black. That's how it works. We don't have commonality.
So under natural law testifiability, Curt, what would you say is how should we compose a jury in this case?
This is another issue. Only white men are capable of being neutral.
You randomly select people from tribes not included, right? To resolve a difference between tribes. Whereas Martin said, if it's within a tribe, then you select people from within the tribe. It depends on whether you're trying to make which problem are you trying to resolve? A conflict in group or a conflict across groups? And what Martin is suggesting, which is quite smart, is that there are degrees of irreconcilability between groups because some groups cannot and will not adjudicate on the same criteria. All right, and so developmentally, this is of course we have this problem with Islam everywhere. So because they're developmentally delayed. So Martin's correct. There's a point. The thing is, you can almost always go from a particular, in other words, where two people are different, and produce a jury of people who are do not consist of those with such alliances to them. We try to do this in some cultures by having 3 judges, right? And they do that because it's too hard to put together. The reason you have 3 judges is you can't put together a jury you can trust.
So in that case, like this 12th jury, we should just randomly select from the world's population or something.
Well, you would select from people who, well, I mean, the jury, your peers, is supposed to mean people.
You can't pick whites and blacks, so it's going to be all Asians.
I was gonna say you pick 12 Chinese dudes.
Jesus Christ. So anyway, that's the way you handle it. I have got experience with quite a few, unfortunately, court in quite a few countries. Excuse me. But you find, strangely enough, that you can actually bring in a bunch of people who are of different races, on different ethnicities. You can bring them into a jury and filter down the people who will answer objectively. And we do it all the time. Martin is correct. There are conditions under which there is so much emotional loading that it's almost impossible. Sorry. But we have a very good, worldwide, we have a very good record of producing the vast majority. I mean, put it this way, the times where juries fail catastrophically, like in what's the guy who the black guy who murders his wife with the glove?
O.J. Simpson.
Right? The times where that happens are actually pretty small. The times that are a problem is where it's the condition that they're trying to judge is not within the realm of experience of the individuals and is politically charged. So who's the kid that's the sort of hero during one of the riots that shot a couple of leftists?
Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah, Rittenhouse. So I was surprised that came out well, because that's a problem where it's very hard to. You really do need to make the case of understanding his state of mind, right? And so they made the case that he understood his state of mind. When you say his state of mind, that's equivalent to saying providing sufficient information to judge the rational incentives at the moment in time. And so if you can do that, you're in good shape. Lawyers are pretty good at filtering out wackos from juries. I mean, I've never been on one. They'll never let me on a jury. Not because I'm a wacko, but because of what I do. They don't want people like you and me on juries. I mean, can you imagine putting you on a jury? Somebody who's trying to get a gun conviction and putting you on the jury? You think that's going to happen? So
I may be able to lie my way through the jury selection process.
well, you think you can, but they're anyway.
Because I'm a nationalist, I don't see these problems even having to emerge. The state is supposed to serve one nation. The jury should be composed of members of that nation. If you're not okay,
No, that I agree with
judged
that.
by them, go live somewhere else.
You're right. That's the point of universal nationalism. The problem is, I would love to live in a country with both of you, right? So as you say, what does the nation consist of?
I'm sure Francis would be okay being judged by Anglo-Saxons.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Yes. The problem is you're more Anglo-Saxon than 95% of Anglo-Saxons behaviorally. Jesus Christ. Where did you get this responsibility for everything thing that you got?
I don't
You
know.
got like the aristocracy responsibility thing in spades.
I think I'm just kind of stubborn.
You're just stuck.
I stubbornly adhere to a set of self-imposed principles that I can't even quite write down, identify.
Yes. All right. So next, how are we doing on time here? We're okay.
We're okay. In fact, we just crossed our, by my count, the official will cross the 250th question.
Wow.
Yay! All right, question 251, or rather question 6. Proponents of intelligent designs like William Dembski argue that specified irreducible complexity, particularly in structure like the bacterial flagellum or in the information encoded in DNA, cannot be accounted for by random mutations and natural selection. Thus, they infer the involvement of an intelligent designer. Personally, I don't think the notion of intelligent designer is coherent. The furthest I could go is some impersonal forces like Hindu Brahman or Aristotle's prime mover. So that I have a hard time squaring this. Can evolutionary computation account for the existence of irreducible complexity structures and informational code? Or is this a mostly useless question because all we can say for sure is that we can testify to which obviously precludes the realm of the supernatural and spiritual?
I don't know about flagellum, but I've heard the same argument for irreducible complexity of eyes and wings, which both have perfectly explainable progression from a single photosensitive cell and winding membranes. We likewise have examples of designs that are far from most efficient, that are explained by evolutionary pet dependency, including in ourselves. Pharynx and larynx connecting probably isn't optimal. There's that one artery taking a nonsensically long way. Curt knows which one it is. I can't remember. And even a human foot only makes sense as an adaptation from what used to be a second pair of hands for climbing trees. Yes, there are limits to what we can confirm without outright replicating it. There always will be, but emergence from evolutionary computation gets regularly underestimated. We see it with LLMs right now, supposedly just token predictors that have developed some understanding of concepts without direct intervention. And in case of organic life, no evidence of creation or intervention has been provided besides of our own recent meddling.
I mean, the way maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but the way I look at it is under a certain set of conditions, let's say the condition persists on this planet, and given enough time and energy, you're going to end up with certain stable relationships. And the bacterial flagellum or so on is probably just one of the few stable relationships that's possible under the circumstance.
But the point about irreducible complexity is that supposedly those stable relations we have around now couldn't have emerged from simple.
They did. I cover this in detail in book 3, Logic, which has thankfully been articulated well as assembly theory, which is that. But yeah, it's actually amazing how fast the information is accumulated by evolutionary computation. In other words, simple, just molecules bumping into each other, right? The rate at which computation happens, because we're often talking about billions or trillions of molecules bumping around with each other in real time. And we don't think about it as memory, right? Memory of success. But anything that survives is memory of success, right? And so it turns out that what happens is the universe calculates things that it's just relieving pressure, defeating entropy by relieving pressure. And so the whole universe is built a little bit at a time from what start out as random and become increasingly less random associations. So we think of it all as random, but what's happening is the field of possible recombinations is narrowing on one hand, and in other words, the chances that carbon and oxygen are going to unite, or hydrogen and oxygen are going to unite is pretty high under the right conditions. But that's true for whole complex things as well. So if you start to think about evolution as consisting of little modules that combine into other modules that combine into other modules, you realize that two things are happening. It's narrowing the field of variations, in other words, what survives. On the other hand, it's opening up the field of possible new permutations.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this intersection of an event that forms new information that provides new, basically, conversion of and stabilization of energy sufficient to defeat whatever entropy is around. And so we narrow evolution narrows things to the point where it can get more sophisticated results. So it's just building fucking Lego bricks. Now we say, well, it's unimaginable. Well, what's unimaginable is when you have just a few molecules on a planet that's warm enough and wet enough, and where water is a universal what do you call it? Dissolved solvent. And you put those things together and you just give it billions of years. The average person is underestimating how many computations is going on on the planet and how many different circumstances. There's all sorts of geographic circumstances on the planet. And all you're really doing is the same thing, is that you get a basic set of stuff that turns into a slime, right? It's essentially near a heat vent or something. And then there's a polarity charge against it, the difference between one edge of the slide and the other. You've now got essentially a capacitor. And so what you've got is the capacitor capacity for the cell wall to form, right? A cell wall to form, which then only needs something inside the cell wall to manage. And so we developed from the evolution of, I think we understand we don't know the exact evolution of these things, because while we can understand how to go from simple life to complex life really just requires mitochondria. And what's mitochondria? It's a thing that basically does, what do you call it when light hits a thing and turns it into energy?
Photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis, right? And so what it basically does is it allowed some cell was able to capture another cell, eat another cell that had a thing that could do photosynthesis and would replicate inside of it, and everything around that and it stayed. And since now you've got a way to get, it's like going from animal power to gasoline. The cell now has tremendous amount of energy. Well, we know how that happened. We basically understand the formation of a cell, but the processes inside of cells, that's complicated, and the RNA DNA transcription is complicated. But they're not complicated in a way that we can't understand them. They're complicated in a way we just haven't discovered them yet. In other words, there's nothing illogical about what's going on, because what is everything? Energy against energy between one barrier and another, right? That's it. That's all it is. That's all it is. And so all we're doing is moving energy around. A cell wall is just a thing that creates a stable environment for that can transform energy, and then it keeps going. So I'm trying not to go down a rat hole, and I'm going down a rat hole anyway. So, but I don't think there's anything to be said for it. The question, if you want to have a divine actor, what the fuck creates the universe in the first place? And I'm not sure we're ever going to know that.
Well, did we really have any reason to assume that there was a point where there wasn't the universe.
Yeah, exactly. There's no reason to think it. So I don't have, except that it's troubling to us. But I suspect it's more of one of the cyclical issues where there's a cycle to the universe that keeps persisting, but that's just my human need to to understand projecting into a universe where we actually don't know and may never know. It's relatively easy to understand how a universe, meaning a collection of matter that's behaving in concert like our universe is, that's pretty easy to understand that formation. But out of what? And I guess my understanding is that the idea of a multiverse is just think of it as soap bubbles, and then the universe consists of a bunch of the multiverse consists of which our universe is a part, is just another soap bubble. I suspect that's probably the closest thing. But then you say, well, what's outside of the universe? And I'm like, I'm not even sure the question has meaning. I think the debate over time is nonsense because there appears to be a 0 point of time, just like there's a 0 point of energy. So, but aside from that, I'm with Martin. I don't know why it matters to us, because there's nothing actionable. We got to figure out if there's anything actionable beyond our solar system before we worry about what's actionable in the universe. Okay, that's my end of it.
Do we got time for one more?
I think so.
All right, question. What was that, Martin?
Maybe.
Okay, well, question 7. Imperium Press short documentary, Why Capital is Woke, lays out the 4 primary explanations for woke capitalism. The libertarian, wokeness creates higher barrier to entrance into corporate marketplace favoring mega corporations. The managerial explanation, Burnham et al., the technological, news media is responsible for their more radical readership after 2010-ish. And finally, and most importantly, the absolutist explanation. Central power makes it so. Central power sets terms of risks for investors. Investors respond, and corporations respond in turn to investors. My question is, who is the central power he speaks of? Is this eye of Sauron that the woke wards off? Is it a rootless international clique of central bankers? Does all power trace back to them? Give me control of the nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws. I forgot who said that. Or do you think Sauron is a self-reinforcing system where financial elites, political actors, and cultural gatekeepers all respond to the same incentives? Profit, stats, power under a regime of centralized risk management.
One of the Rothschilds said that. The strength is that it's not any single organization, but a network of people in many organizations, or who otherwise have influence over them. Although there are still hierarchies with specific oligarchs at the top, my understanding is many of them are formerly KGB.
Who is the central? Martin's right, of course, as always. I've just finished this chapter in Volume 1 about this problem, and I just see it as I don't understand why it's even a question. There are elite formation, and the hierarchy of elite formation is a natural consequence of the returns on human cooperation and organization. And when you talk about large numbers of people on a scale like this, you're simply talking about people who have an incentive to make use of prevailing norms, institutions, resources, and populations. They're taking advantage of those things that exist for their own interest, and I don't see why that's particularly complicated. The problem isn't get, as I think is subconsciously implied, is getting people to have some holy religion that they all follow. It's to prevent the formation of influence that circumvents what we would consider merit and reciprocity. Or, as Martin would bring up, because I'm trying to be respectful of Martin's position, that is in the interest of the population as a whole, regarding rather than cross-population interests. I would say that the problem of cross-population interests is what gives opportunity for what we call essentially stateless elites who have the protection of a state, sort of like how Facebook has the protection of the state. But I mean the financial sector, they have protections of states or individual states, but they're acting in extra state manners. So they're trying to create a state without a state by capital alliances instead of human and territorial and institutional alliances. So the problem is policing extra state elites like this. And the reason they don't police them is that they're so valuable to the states that defend them. And so it's sort of like, the states produce, what it is, manners produce knights who are basically gangsters, and states produce elites that are basically gangsters. The problem is that we have few organisms, institutions, or no institutions that guard against the formation of gangsters, which is what we call extranational elites. And so, is there? This question bothers me because it's right after the question on what do you call it? Design? What do you call it?
The
intelligent design. It's like, it's the same thing. People think there has to be some conspiracy of intent when there's just conspiracy of common interest. And so, and then there's
that intent emerges from common interest.
I'm getting there. I was getting there. You're right. Yes. And it's from the common interest that intent emerges, because people want to persist their advantages. So I would say that if you're talking about the natural consequence of criminality emerging among people who have the capacity to, through indirection, to circumvent the constraints that we within polities place upon one another. And so that's the problem of elite formation, whether it's local, whether it's federal, whether it's national, or whether it's imperial, or whether it's international. We've not before, in many times, had the capacity to produce elites of this nature and of this scale before, and we have done so, and we've done so because we have failed to be able to create institutions that police against them. And it's because, honestly, those people are so valuable to the states that host them, and the elites within those states, that they have no incentive to police them unless their actions put they themselves at risk. So I don't see, I understand the tendency of the right to try to frame things as personal when they are impersonal, until the point at which Martin quite rigorously is defended that they are actually intentional by those persons. Do you think that the people who run the WEF have evil intent? In their mind, they don't. All right.
Nobody who has evil intent thinks of himself as having evil intent.
There we go.
They
Exactly.
all find ways to justify their actions.
So we can judge whether people do evil by whether they think they do evil. That's stupid.
Yes. Correct. So I guess that's my answer to the question, is that the system of incentives that we fail to police gives rise to the capacity for this hierarchy of elite formation, which
But
eventually escapes our political ability to control it. But
there's a feedback loop, though, because of how entrenched that elite is,
yes,
and because of what their group strategies, then they have altered the system specifically so it favors them in these
right,
ways.
which is why
And-
civilizations fail. That's why they fail. It's always why they
And they prevent us to produce competing elites. The
Yes.
only elites we are allowed to produce is those that serve them.
Yes. Which is why civilizations calcify and fail. That's what everybody fails for the same reason. You put enough renters in place to the point where the population will no longer tolerate it, and they defect. Well, I don't know. That's sort of been what's going on for the past 30 years here. I don't know why it should be surprising that we're any different from anywhere else on the planet.
So then the system's ability to self-correct then rests upon the power to deny power by the rest of us, by the
Yes.
non-elites.
Which
If the
means
non-elites have if the non-elites have means to deny power, then the system can reset faster.
yes,
We need to be better organized than them. We need to be better organized than them. Group strategies about organization.
I mean, that's really just another way of saying that the power, the ability to concentrate power to deny the power.
yes, that's it. All right. Did we kill it today?
Yep. We did good.
You do okay, Martin? Did we okay today, Martin?
Yep.
All right. So do I get to sign off now? Is that what is mine?
You do.
All right. This is Martin and Francis and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. It's been our Friday Q&A session for February 25th, 2025. We answered seven questions, which brought us over the 250 mark, if I'm correct, if I can understand correctly. Can you do your part of where they can submit the questions, etc.?
Yeah. So right after meeting, right after this one, I archive this live recording and I create a new one for 2 weeks from now. And the form for submitting questions is in the description of that upcoming live stream. And I forgot something else I was gonna say. So I did restructure our YouTube channel. You can for all of these Q&A sessions, just go to the playlist. It's under one of the playlists. You'll see it there. It may not necessarily show up under the list of videos anymore, because the list of videos, we're going to prioritize all of the convention videos.
Okay, say that again and missed that.
Office hours were always separated in their own life bubble.
Well, yeah, you're right. Never mind about that. Forget what I said.
So you have the convention videos.
The chats of Curt and Brett are separated somewhere.
That's also under his own playlist.
This is nice. You did a good job.
So with that, we'll say like, bell, subscribe.
Like, bell, and subscribe. Ring the notification bell, subscribe. Martin, do you have anything to say? I like it. Martin's so serious, all the time. I feel I have to make him do something less serious to wave. You can't wave goodbye everything, Martin? No. I love you guys. Thanks a lot, everyone.